Hi, it's Carly with LaunchCode. So we're back in our coding events application. We're going to spend the next couple of videos going over or adding features to create model validation within our application. Model validation really touches upon all of the components of our application. So we're going to go kind of step by step. The first step in adding some validation to our data is to add what are called validation attributes into our view model. So think about our add event form view. Right now, if you were to pull up your application, you would be able to test that you can just submit a blank form. You don't have to even touch either of these input boxes for a name and description field. We don't really want that. We want some information to be submitted when we're creating an event view model and then an event model. So the first restriction that we can put on these items is to say that they're both required for a model to be created. And that annotation is just going to be called required. And in order to take advantage of these validation annotations, you have to import the necessary library, which is called data annotations. And so data annotations will give you a number of these that you can take a look at in the C# documentation or ASP.NET documentation. We are just going to kind of introduce you to a few, but just know that there's plenty out there for other forms that you may create. So in addition to saying that we want both name and description required, we can also put some limitations or some requirements around, and keep doing curly brackets, some requirements around what those strings look like when they are inputted. So maybe we want to say, a lot of forms say that you have to have a name that's between 3 characters and 50 characters. So we can say string length, which is another validation annotation. We can say that needs to be between 50 and 3. So in this case, this annotation does have a required first option or first parameter of maximum length, and then if you want to add a minimum length, you do so by explicitly declaring it. You can see some of that information coming through on this tooltip. But again, the documentation is going to be your friend here for learning more about how these work. We don't want the same restrictions on description, but we can still put some restrictions. Descriptions tend to be longer than a name, so we can give that. We can say that description shouldn't be longer than 500 characters. And we can also, just to kind of test out some more of these annotations or attributes, let's add another one. Let's add another property onto the view model itself called contact email. So when you submit an event, you want to, if you have some information about the person or the contact email responsible for organizing the event, you could input that information here. But let's say this one isn't required. If you have that information, put it in. If you don't, no big deal. But it is an email, and emails, as we know, have special formatting. There's an attribute that we can add here called email address that will help be a checkpoint for a user to enter the correct email. So for example, if someone entered their email but forgot the @ sign, this validation attribute would flag that, things like that. So for each of these, really, for each validation attribute that you're adding, you can include a custom message that's returned to the user. So that would be something that's going to appear on our view if the form is sent back to the user if something doesn't quite meet the validation requirements. So for example, if we enter everything but we don't enter a name, we would want to send something back to the user to say why their form isn't being submitted, why that event isn't being created. So we would add this option called error message, and we'd send something that says name is required, or please enter a name into this form, something like that. Let's add something similar to our description. say right, so you can customize the tone that you want to take when interacting with the user. For these guys, for string length, maybe you want to have a different error message. You could say, again, because it can be custom to what needs to be improved with the form submission. And this is really good practice for user experience when designing your application. So in this error message, maybe we say name must be between 3 and 50 characters. I've had spelling get the best of me before, but I think that's fine. Okay. Description, we could say something different. We can say, we'll copy this again. For this guy, maybe we just say it's too long. Now maybe that's not the best, maybe that's not the best error message, because are we indicating to the user how long is too long? Things to think about. For email address, we don't need to add an error message to this guy for now. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are going to take validation steps component by component. So this is all that we'll add to our view model for validation. But if we were to run our application now, we're not going to see any of this implemented. We're not going to be able to submit an empty form and then get some message back that tells us why an event isn't created. In fact, we're still going to be able to create an empty event. And that's because validation does require changes to be made across the application in the other components. So the next step in this process is to add to add the necessary logic into our action methods in our events controller to say what routing needs to take place, what do the traffic cops need to do if these validation requirements aren't met. So we'll tackle that in the next video. But just before we forget, we have made some changes to the form. We want to make sure that we're reflecting those in the necessary portions of our app that are affected by this. So we've added this new contact email. Let's first of all make sure that we're not only adding that to add event view model, but we're also going to be adding that to the event itself. So we'll add an event property, we'll add a contact email property into our event. Type string. Oh my God. And even though it's not required, we do want to add its assignment into our constructor as we have for name and description. And since we want a user to actually be able to add this in the add form, we're going to want to add a new input box into that add form. So we'll call this contact email. Oh, I didn't realize I didn't get rid of these guys. You don't need those because the framework will complete those for you. And then this is not going to be for description, but rather for contact email. And then just to, again, to make sure that we don't forget this, although we're not fully updating our controller with validation changes, we do have this one instance where we're creating an event object, and because this constructor now can assign a contact email. Let's just add that just so we don't forget. Doesn't like that guy. Oh, I didn't put a comma there. Okay, cool. Yeah, so running this application now, it's not even going, we can't even confirm that we've made some changes on the back end that implement the same functionality that we have before, because that isn't what we've done. We've just made the first steps towards changing the behavior of our application. So like I said, well, at least we can confirm that we have a contact email. Now, it does have a different, do we like that name? Maybe we don't. We could always change that within the form, because this is just a reflection of the property on the view model. But like I said, we'll still be able to submit this empty form. So we haven't finished our validation work, but we have made steps that at least haven't broken our application yet. So now that we've written those validation attributes on our view model, we can explore what needs to be done inside of the controller to handle validation.